أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته everyone. My name is Muhammad Hanan and I'm foundation level student at Rehan School, Islamabad, Barabi campus. So viewers, today I'm going to talk with Maya on the simple topic of food. So Maya, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Alright Maya, so my first question is why was wood important in early human civilization?
It was the difference between survival and extinction. In early civilizations, food wasn't just about hunger, it was the foundation of everything. Once people stopped wandering to find food and started farming, they could stay in one place. That led to the birth of cities, specialized jobs like builders or priests, and eventually the complex societies we have today.
Alright Maya, my next question is how did ancient humans first use wood?
They mostly started with the basics fuel and shelter. Fire was the game changer, allowing them to cook food and stay warm. Then they moved into building simple structures and creating tools like spears or handles for stone axes.
Alright, Maya, thank you. My next question is what types of trees were most useful to early societies?
Grains were the absolute heavy hitters. Wheat, barley, and rice were the most useful because they provided a reliable source of calories and could be stored for long periods. This meant societies didn't have to worry about where their next meal was coming from every single day, which is what really allowed those early cities to grow.
Alright, Maya, thank you. My next question is how did wood help humans survive harsh climates?
So it gave them a way to store energy. High calorie foods, especially fats and proteins from hunting and gathering, were essential for maintaining body heat and staying alive during freezing winters. Then, as agriculture took hold, preserved foods like dried grains or salted meats, they could survive seasons where nothing grew.
Alright, Maya, thank you. My next question is why was wood essential for building shelters?
It provided the perfect balance of strength and flexibility. It was easy to harvest and shape with basic tools, making it the go to for frames, walls, and roofs. Plus, it's a natural insulator, which kept early humans warmer than if they were just huddling in a cave.
Alright, Maya. So, my next question is how did firewood change human history?
Hmm. It basically unlocked the modern world. Firewood gave us the ability to control fire, which meant we could cook, which made digestion easier and gave our brains more energy to grow. Beyond that, it provided light and heat, allowing humans to survive in colder regions they otherwise would have had to avoid.
Alright,
It
Maya.
turned the night. I'm with you.
My next question is what role did wood play in cooking food?
It was the heat source that changed everything. Using wood for fire allowed humans to cook food, which killed bacteria and made calories much easier to absorb. It essentially turned raw, tough ingredients into something digestible and safe, which is a huge part of why our ancestors' brains were able to evolve and grow.
All right, my thank you. My next question is, how did wooden tools improve daily life?
They made the heavy lifting a lot easier. Wooden tools like handles for axes, spears for hunting, and simple plows for farming meant humans could apply more force and precision than they could with just their bare hands. It shifted things from just surviving to actually managing their environment.
All right, my thank you. My next question is, why was wood easier to use than stone or metal in ancient times?
It was all about accessibility and versatility. Wood is much easier to carve, shape, and modify with simple tools compared to stone, which can shatter, or metal, which requires high heat furnaces to melt and mold. It's lightweight, abundant, and you can fix it on the fly, making it the most practical choice for early humans.
All right, my thank you. My next question is, how did forests influence where civilizations settled?
They provided everything a new settlement needed to survive. Forests were a gold mine for building materials, fuel, and food. Early civilizations usually settled near forests because they offered a ready made supply of wood for homes and tools, and the nearby wildlife provided a steady source of protein. Plus, the trees often indicated a reliable water source nearby, which is the ultimate deal breaker for any early city.
All right, ma'am. My next question is, what were the earliest wooden structures ever built?
The earliest ones were mostly basic shelters and defensive walls. Think simple things like lean tos, wooden fences, and basic post and beam huts. Some of the oldest known wooden structures date back to the Neolithic period, where they used huge wooden posts to support roofs made of thatch or hides. They weren't exactly skyscrapers, but for the time, they were a massive leap in engineering.
All right, Maya, thank you. So, my next question is, how did wood contribute to transportation?
But it basically got us moving. Wood made it possible to build things like rafts, canoes, and eventually wagons and ships. Instead of just walking, humans could use rivers and oceans to travel, trade, and explore, which completely changed how different cultures connected.
All right, thank you. So, my next question is, why were boats made from wood in ancient times?
I'm thinking they just used what was around them. Wood was lightweight, floating in, strong enough to hold weight, making it the obvious choice for boats and rafts long before we had the materials we use today.
All right, Maya. So, my next question is, how did wooden wheels revolutionize trade?
They turned a slog into a sprint. Before wheels, trade was limited to what a few people could carry or drag. Once wooden wheels and carts came along, humans could transport massive amounts of grain, textiles, and tools over long distances. It basically opened up the first global trade networks, allowing cities to specialize in what they did best and trade for the rest.
All right, Maya. My next question is, what role did wood play in farming?
It was the backbone of agriculture. Wooden plows and hoes allowed early farmers to turn the soil and plant seeds much more efficiently than doing it by hand. It shifted farming from a small scale survival effort to a full blown industry that could feed entire cities.
All right, Maya. My next question is, how were wooden plows used in agriculture?
They were mostly used for storage and stability. In early agriculture, raised wooden floors were a huge deal for keeping harvested grains and seeds away from damp earth and pests. It kept the food dry and prevented rot, which was basically the only way to ensure a community had enough to eat through the winter.
All right, Maya. Thank you. My next question is, why was wood important in ancient warfare?
It was the main material for both offense and defense, from weapons like bows, spears, and shields to massive defensive structures like palisades and siege towers. Wood was the go to because it was accessible and easier to work with than stone or metal. It basically defined how armies fought and how cities protected themselves for centuries.
All right, Maya. My next question is, how were wooden weapons designed?
It was all about the right tree for the right job. Design depended on a weapon. For a bow, they needed flexible wood like yew or ash that could bend without snapping. For
Oh,
a spear or club, they wanted something dense and heavy like oak to maximize the impact. Then they'd carve it, fire harden the tip by heating it in a fire to make the wood tougher, and maybe lash a stone or metal head to the end using animal sinew or leather strips.
all right, Maya. My next question is, what kinds of shields were made from wood?
Most were made from lightweight but tough woods. Early shields often used planks of poplar or willow because they were light enough to carry for hours but strong enough to soak up an impact. To make them even tougher, They'd often stretch animal hide or leather over the wood and reinforce the edges with metal if they could afford it.
All right, man. Thank you. My next question is how did wood help build early cities?
It provided the raw materials to scale up. Early cities needed more than just a few huts. Wood was used for everything from the structural beams of larger public buildings and temples to the massive gates and fortifications that kept the city safe. It allowed people to build vertically and create more complex layouts, turning small villages into actual urban centers.
All right, ma'am. My next question is why did ancient builders combine wood with mud and stone?
It was the best of both worlds. Wood gave them the structure and flexibility, while mud and stone provided the mass and durability. By combining them, they got buildings that were stronger, more wind resistant, and way better at regulating temperature, keeping things cool in the summer and warm in the winter.
All right, ma'am. My next question is how did wooden bridges connect civilizations?
I think you mean wooden ships, right? They were the ultimate
Wooden
bridges.
bridges.
Instead of, I meant they acted like bridges between people. Wooden ships allowed civilizations to travel across oceans, trade spices and silk, and share ideas. It's how the world actually started to feel connected.
All right, ma'am. My next question is what role did wood play in trade routes?
I'm not entirely sure what you mean by faith woods. Could you tell me more about that?
What my question is what role did wood play in trade routes?
It was the engine that powered them. Wood provided the ships for sea routes and the wagons for land routes, which meant goods could travel further and faster than ever before. It basically turned local trading into a global economy
All right, my thank you. My next question is why were forests considered valuable resources?
because they were literally a survival kit. Forests provided everything from fuel and building materials to food and medicine. In many ancient cultures, controlling forests meant controlling the resources needed to build a navy, house a population, and keep everyone warm during the winter. It was essentially the gold mine of the ancient world.
All right, my next question is how did ancient people cut down trees without modern tools?
I think you might mean trees instead of priests. They
Yes.
used stone axes and later bronze or iron ones to chop through the trunks. It was a lot of hard work, but it's how they got the materials they needed.
All right, my next question is what tools were used for woodworking in early societies?
They started with a few basics that did the trick. Stone adzes and chisels were the go to for carving and shaping, while scrapers made from flint or obsidian were used to smooth out the rough edges. Later on, they added drills made of bone or hardwood to create holes for joints and pegs. It was a slow process, but it's how they turned a raw log into a finished tool or piece of furniture.
All right, my next question is how did carpentry become a respected skill?
It turned a basic necessity into an art form. Carpentry became respected because it required a mix of deep knowledge and precision. A carpenter didn't just chop wood, they understood which tree was best for a specific job, how to account for the wood shrinking or expanding, and how to build things that would actually last. When you're the person who can build the city's gates or a royal temple, you're not just a laborer, you're an essential engineer.
All right, my next question is what is the history of woodworking?
It's essentially the story of human ingenuity. It started with the simplest things, using fire to harden spear tips and carving with sharp stones. As we moved into the Neolithic period, people began to create more complex joints and structures, and by the time the Bronze and Iron Ages hit, we had specialized tools like saws and planes that allowed for incredible precision. Eventually, this evolved into the high art of cabinetry and architecture, where woodworking wasn't just about survival, but about beauty and status. It's a journey from a basic survival tool to one of the most sophisticated crafts in history.
All right, my next question is how did wood influence ancient architecture?
It gave them the ability to build bigger and bolder. Wood provided the structural skeletons for buildings. Beams and pillars allowed for wider open spaces and taller roofs than they could achieve with just mud or stone. It also led to the invention of things like trusses and arches, which changed how people thought about space and design.
All right, ma'am. My next question is why were temples sometimes built with wood?
Because it allowed for a level of detail and grandeur that stone just couldn't match. Wood was way easier to carve, so architects could create intricate sculptures, ornate columns, and beautiful ceiling patterns that made a temple feel divine. Plus, in some cultures, certain trees were seen as sacred, so using that specific wood was a way of honoring the gods.
All right, ma'am. My next question is how did wooden homes differ across civilizations?
It mostly came down to what was growing in their backyard. In colder climates like Northern Europe, they built thick walled log cabins to trap heat. In places like Japan, they used lighter, flexible wooden frames and sliding doors to handle humidity and earthquakes. And in tropical areas, they often built their wooden homes on stilts to stay dry and avoid pests. Same material, but completely different solutions based on the environment.
All right, Maya. So my next question is what role did wood play in ancient times?
It was essentially the universal tool. It provided the foundation for survival, from the fire that cooked their food to the homes that sheltered them and the tools that allowed them to farm and fight. Without wood, the leap from nomadic wandering to settled civilizations just wouldn't have happened.
All right, Maya. My next question is how did Mesopotamians use wood despite limited forests?
They got creative with imports. Since they didn't have many forests of their own, they traded for high quality timber from places like Lebanon, specifically for those famous cedar trees. For the stuff they couldn't import, they used whatever scrub brush or date palms were available, even if it wasn't as strong. It turned their wood shortage into a huge driver for international trade.
All right, Maya. My next question is why was cedar wood prized in ancient cultures?
It was the gold standard of timber. Cedar was prized because it was incredibly durable, naturally resistant to rot and insects, and it had this amazing scent. Because it grew in specific regions like Lebanon, it was rare and expensive, making it a huge status symbol. If you had a cedar lined room or a cedar temple, you were basically telling the world you were powerful and wealthy.
All right, Maya. My next question is how did the Chinese use wood in construction?
They mastered the art of flexibility. Chinese construction is famous for its bracket systems called dogong, which allowed them to build massive roofs and overhanging eaves without using a single nail. By interlocking wooden pieces, their buildings could sway slightly during earthquakes instead of snapping, which is why so many of their ancient designs were so resilient.
All right, my next question is what role did wood play in Roman engineering?
I'm guessing you mean modern engineering. Even today, wood is a massive part of the game. We've moved from just logs to engineered wood like CLT, cross laminated timber, which lets us build skyscrapers out of wood. It's way more sustainable than concrete and steel, so it's basically a return to our roots, but with high tech precision.
All right, my next question is how did Vikings use wood in shipbuilding?
They basically perfected the art of the longship. The Vikings used a technique called clinker building, where they overlapped the wooden planks to make the holes incredibly strong but still flexible. This allowed their ships to be shallow enough to sail right up into rivers for raids, but tough enough to cross the open Atlantic. It's basically why they were able to explore and settle so much of the known world.
All right, my next question is why were wooden ships crucial for exploration?
They were the only way to cross the horizon. Without them, humans were trapped by the coastlines. Wooden ships gave explorers the ability to carry enough food, water, and crew to sail for weeks or months, allowing them to map the oceans and discover entirely new continents. It turned the world from a series of isolated pockets into one connected map.
All right, ma'am. My next question is how did wood help expand empires?
I think you mean wood and explorers again, right? It gave them a platform to venture into the unknown. By building ships that could handle the open sea, explorers could carry the supplies and crew needed for long voyages, which essentially pushed the boundaries of the known world.
All right, ma'am. My next question is what role did forests play in economic growth?
They were basically the bank accounts of the ancient world. Controlling a forest meant you had a monopoly on building materials, fuel, and trade goods. If a neighboring city didn't have wood, they had to pay whatever price you wanted just to keep their people warm or build their defenses, which made forests a primary source of wealth and political power.
All right, my next question is why was charcoal important in ancient industries?
It was the key to higher temperatures. Regular wood burns too fast and not hot enough to melt metal. By burning wood in a low oxygen environment to make charcoal, ancient people created a fuel that burned much hotter and more consistently. This is what actually allowed the Bronze and Iron Ages to happen because without that extreme heat, you can't smelt ore into metal.
All right, my next question is how was wood used to make tools and furniture?
It started with choosing the right grain. For tools, they focused on durability and strength, carving handles that fit the hand. For furniture, it was about stability and joinery. They moved from simple slabs of wood to complex interlocking joints, like dovetails that held pieces together without needing nails. It turned a basic tree trunk into everything from a sturdy chair to a detailed chest for storing valuables.
All right, my next question is how did wooden furniture reflect social status?
It was all about the material and the detail. In the ancient world, if you had furniture made from rare imported woods like cedar or ebony, it was a huge flex. Most people just had simple stools or mats. So owning a carved, polished wooden bed or a decorated throne was a way of showing everyone exactly where you sat in the social hierarchy.
All right, my next question is what role did wood play in religion and rituals?
It was often seen as the bridge between the earthly and the divine. Many cultures viewed trees as sacred, and wood was used to build altars, shrines, and totems, from the ancient druids' sacred groves to the wooden idols and early shrines. Using wood was a way to connect with nature and the spirits they believed lived within the forest.
All right, my next question is why were sacred objects often carved from wood?
Because it was seen as a living connection to the gods. Cutting an object from a sacred tree wasn't just about getting material, it was a ritual in itself. People believed the tree's spirit or power remained in the wood, so um, a carved idol or a sacred staff wasn't just a tool, it was a physical vessel for a deity or a spiritual force.
All right, my thank you. My next question is how did ancient artists use wood creatively?
They turned raw nature into art. Ancient artists used wood for everything from massive, detailed sculptures and masks to intricate jewelry and decorative panels. Because it was so much easier to carve than stone, they could go wild with the details, creating fluid shapes, expressive faces, and complex patterns that told stories of their gods, their ancestors, and their daily lives.
All right, my next question is what are some famous wooden aircraft from history?
The Wright brothers are the big ones. Their first plane, the 1903 Wright Flyer, was made almost entirely of spruce and ash with a fabric covering. Then you've got early biplanes from World War I, which used wooden frames because they were light and strong before aluminum took over. It's wild to think that the first few decades of flight were basically just high tech carpentry.
All right, Maya, thank you for giving me this information in detail. So, bye bye. Take care. See you soon.
You're very welcome. It was a pleasure. Take care, and I'll see you soon.
So, viewers, this was my session with Maya. I hope you like it. We'll meet again in the next video. Until then, Allah Hafiz, Pakistan Zindabad.